Austin Thomas's third stint at LSU is coming to an end. We've got the latest. Locked on LSU. Here we go.
You are Locked On LSU, your daily podcast on the LSU Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Okay, let's get it. It is Locked on LSU, your team every day. I'm your host, Matt Moscona. Thanks so much for making us your first listen. We're free, available wherever you get podcasts, of course, on YouTube as well. So please subscribe. As always, one of the fastest ways to help us grow is by leaving your comments below. So thank you sincerely for that. Thank you for helping make the Locked On Podcast Network the #1 sports podcast network in the world. Well, it looks as though Austin Thomas's third stint at LSU is over. Now, it's not a tremendous surprise that LSU is going to have a new general manager. As a matter of fact, that's something we've talked about pretty routinely here since Lane Kiffin was hired. There was I think maybe an assumption by LSU fans that because of the long history with Austin Thomas and Lane Kiffin that Austin would be retained. But sometimes there's more than meets the eye. One of the things I've asked people who have pointed out that Austin and Lane worked together at Ole Miss for 2 years before Austin came back to LSU just about 2 years ago is, did you ever consider why Austin Thomas left Ole Miss and how that might have made Lane Kiffin feel? So I think there are certainly maybe some exposed nerve endings to how that ended and maybe some more there than meets the eye. But as soon as Lane Kiffin was hired, there was no doubt that Austin Thomas was not going to be LSU's general manager. The only question is, would he remain on staff? And if you doubted that at all, I'll take you to Lane Kiffin's introductory press conference on Monday, and he's telling the story of landing in Baton Rouge and all the board and the LSU dignitaries pick him up at the airport, then his first time going over to football ops, and sort of mixed into all that as he's talking about seeing the Heisman trophies and the national championship trophies and everything driving by Tiger Stadium. Lane said this.
Then you walk into the facility and myself and the coaches, our general manager, like you walk in and I'm like looking around and I'm like, God, like it's like we're in the NFL.
The coaches, and he says, our general manager. Well, our general manager he's talking about there wasn't Austin Thomas. It was Billy Glasscock, who he's bringing with him from Ole Miss. So a couple of things. We'll talk about Austin, then I'll tell you what I know about Billy Glasscock. And quite honestly, the really interesting thing is that I've already had a few conversations this week with current members of the staff and with high school coaches and agents that have already had some dealings with Lane Kiffin and with Billy Glasscock. I'll give you their early impressions. I have not yet, as of now, met Billy Glasscock, but I'll give you the impressions that I've heard of him from others. So when you look at Austin Thomas, this is, again, his third stint at LSU. His career began actually at Tennessee as a recruiting and personnel assistant. He was a defensive quality control coach. He was there for the brief time that Lane Kiffin was in Knoxville at Tennessee. That 1 year overlapped with Austin. Well, when Lane Kiffin left Tennessee for Southern Cal, he brought Austin Thomas with him out to LA as the assistant director of player personnel and operations. And Austin was there for 3 years before LSU brought him back. Les Miles brought Austin Thomas. I shouldn't say back. Les Miles brought Austin Thomas to Baton Rouge. And he stayed here for 5 years under Les. And then when Ed Ogeron was promoted, he named Austin Thomas at that point the general manager, which was the first time a decade ago. It was the first time anybody used the term general manager. And the Football Scoop at that time had named Austin Thomas the player personnel director of the year in college football and was a rising star. Ed Ogeron, in an interview he gave to Football Scoop for that piece, talked about how someday Austin, how bright Austin was and someday was going to be an NFL general manager. This is a decade ago when Austin was in his early 30s. You could tell, and I've raved about Austin here so many times over the years. Not only is he a brilliant mind and so analytical, but he's also just a very good person. He's a great, man, husband, father, all of that stuff. Then Austin left LSU and spent some time at Texas A&M for a couple of years, and then during the COVID year was at Baylor under Dave Aranda. Aranda brought Austin there. and then back to LSU for the final year of the Ed Ogeron era in 2021. So Ogeron brought Austin back, and when that staff was let go, Austin found his way to Oxford, where he linked up with Lane Kiffin and he was there in Oxford from 22 to 24 before ultimately he came back to LSU for his third stint. And I think it's important to note that Austin Thomas wasn't a Brian Kelly hire. Austin Thomas was a Scott Woodward hire. Scott wanted to have that role filled. Brian Kelly has said it many times that, one of the reasons he never really bought any of those NFL overtures was because he wanted to recruit and develop and build a roster that way. He didn't want a general manager, basically picking his roster. So it was something Brian Kelly was always resistant to, but that Scott Woodward determined was necessary. And Austin, with his love for Baton Rouge, his love for LSU, his ties to LSU, having been here before, relationships with still people around the program, made that a very natural and seamless transition. And Austin's role expanded as a guy who was certainly a conduit between football or athletic administration and Scott Woodward and the LSU football program as the general manager. And you also saw Austin on game days next to Brian Kelly with a headset on, who handled some of the game day operations like clock management and stuff like that. So Austin was on a headset right next to Brian Kelly during the games. Now, when Brian Kelly was let go and Frank Wilson was inserted as the new interim head coach, Austin was no longer on a headset next to the head coach for the remaining 4 games of this season. But it's the hard part of any type of coaching change is you're going to have turnover and people's lives are uprooted. And it's true, this is the path that these people choose professionally. And so it's just something that they know is always a possibility. But you do end up losing good people. It's undeniable that you're going to have good, talented, hardworking people who are successful at what they do lose their job because whoever the new coach is has the autonomy to bring in their people. I mean, we're talking about this conversation right now with Frank Wilson as well, who's a guy that's been super loyal to LSU and stepped up in a massive way to be the interim head coach when Brian Kelly was fired and has had 2 stints at LSU and is so rooted and integrated in New Orleans. But Lane Kiffin's running backs coach has been with him for almost a decade, and Lane wants to bring the guy with him that's been with him for a decade, and he has the authority and autonomy and prerogative to do that. So too is it true here. But I also think that you do have. I don't want to make this salacious. I don't want to make this sound like Austin Thomas and Lane Kiffin hate each other and it's this awful relationship. I can't speak to that. I've never even met Lane. Well, I've met Lane Kiffin, but I've never had a private conversation with Lane Kiffin. Certainly I have with Austin Thomas, and he's never said a bad word to me personally about Lane Kiffin. But you can see sometimes how things can be there can be a little hurt feelings, and there could be a messy breakup when things go a certain way. And I think, at such a transformative time in college football, when general managers were coming into play, when programs were generating and creating their evaluation system and structure, and how they're, with NIL and moving toward revenue share, how they were mapping out roster building and allocating funds. I mean, it was sort of a peek behind the curtain. And then maybe there was a thought from Lane that Austin was there and then left for a conference rival. So for whatever reason, this was always going to be the end. The question was that Austin was not going to be the general manager. The question was, could Austin be retained potentially somewhere in athletic administration? And according to Football Scoop, the report apparently is no, that Austin Thomas will not be continuing at LSU. And I can tell you that's something that I had maybe thrown out to a few people to see, because one thing to consider is, Verge Osbury was promoted internally from his associate athletic director role to the permanent AD. Well, they still haven't filled Verge's old role within athletic administration. So it stands to reason LSU is still going to hire someone else, and it's a high-ranking senior associate athletic director within the athletic administration to replace Verge. I mean, someone's got to do that role with Verge as the athletic director now. So could that have been Austin? Apparently the answer is no. And so Austin Thomas will no longer be a part of LSU athletics, according to the report from Football Scoop, and it kind of is in line with everything we've heard. So, there's this other part of what happened on Sunday was that maybe people thought it was going to go a different way, because there was that video that WBRZ posted of Lane Kiffin in his office on Sunday night with Austin Thomas up there as well. I'll tell you maybe what I know a little bit about that and about LSU's new general manager in Billy Glasscock, and adding a few more support staff personnel members. We'll get to all that as we continue here, Locked on LSU, your team every day. The holidays are officially here, which means gift hunting season is on. And if you want something meaningful, personal, and guaranteed to get a reaction, Aura Frames is the gift that delivers every time. It's not just something you wrap up, it's a way to share memories because Aura isn't your average picture frame. You can preload the frame with photos before gifting it. So when they plug it in, the memories are already there. No apps to figure out, no setup headaches, just instant smiles. You can even add personalized messages right inside the frame so the gift feels thoughtful the moment it's open. Packaging comes gift ready, no price tag, no wrapping needed. It is a huge win. It's a holiday gift that actually gets used and never forgotten in a drawer. For a limited time, save on the perfect gift by visiting auraframes.com to get $35 off Aura's best-selling carver mat frames, named #1 by Wirecutter, by using promo code COLLEGE at checkout. That's AURA frames.com, promo code COLLEGE. This deal is exclusive to listeners, and frames sell out fast. So order yours now to get it in time for the holidays. Support the show by mentioning us at checkout. Terms and conditions apply. And we're brought to you by FanDuel. The NFL Sundays move fast in one big way, one big play, and suddenly everything feels different. That's what makes live betting with the FanDuel app so exciting. You're not just watching the game, you're reacting to it in real time. With FanDuel, you can place bets as soon as the action unfolds. Every drive, every momentum swing, every highlight moment. Live betting is best when the game starts to shift. When a receiver gets hot, the defense tightens up, the momentum flips after a turnover, and FanDuel lets you jump into that moment. Live spreads and money lines adjust instantly. Player props update as guys heat up. You can bet next touchdown scorers, drive results, totals, and more. It keeps you locked into every snap, every drive, every possibility. So if you want to be right in the middle of the action this season, visit FanDuel.com and place your NFL live bets all season long. FanDuel, the game moves fast, and so can you. So there was a meeting Sunday as soon as Lane Kiffin landed in Baton Rouge, and Lane Kiffin went up to football ops, immediately started calling recruits. Remember, Sunday night meant you were less than 36 hours. You were about less than you were less than 72 hours away from the start of the early signing period on Wednesday. So it was imperative that Kiffin and his staff immediately got ready for signing day, for the early signing period. They had to get to know the LSU commits, those that they didn't already have a relationship with. They had to evaluate the current commits and start making calls about which guys were going to be in this class or had the opportunity still to be in this class, what guys from Ole Miss they might want to bring with them if they had that opportunity. And so a big part of that was getting a debriefing from the current staff. And a big part of that, obviously, were Austin Thomas and Frank Wilson. Austin Thomas is the general manager. Frank Wilson, not only is the interim head coach, but also as a recruiting coordinator. Those are the two guys who had the most information about the current roster and the current signing class. So a lot of people looked at that meeting on Sunday in Lane Kiffin's office with the video from the street level from WBRZ as this indicator that Lane was going to keep Austin on board. That, as I understand it, was more of a debriefing to say, here's the guys we have on our roster. Here's who's committed. Here's who we're still targeting. Here's who we could flip. Here's who we're losing from this current roster to graduation. Here's what priorities we think we have in the portal. Here's how much money we have currently. How much powder do you have right now? Like all of that sort of stuff was sort of a debriefing, and it wasn't necessarily an indicator that Austin Thomas was going to stay on staff, clearly. So what we know is that Billy Glasscock is the general manager that's following Lane Kiffin from Ole Miss to Baton Rouge. And in a very short amount of time, I've already had several conversations with people who I have not met Billy Glasscock, but he has already, obviously, with signing day, they've talked to recruits on the phone. We know they've had face-to-face meetings with several coaches, high school coaches, the current staff members. So there's a lot of people who have interacted with this new staff already that I know. And what's so interesting, I think, is how many people associated with this staff that are, I shouldn't say associated with the staff, how many people that have associated with the new staff that have gotten to meet them and talk to them have said essentially a lot of the same things, be it agents or high school coaches. One person told me, I'll read you this text, said Billy Glasscock is really impressive, did a great job with the presentation of how he built a roster and a staff. Lane is authentic and transparent. I mean, that's a pretty consistent theme that I've heard from a lot of people that I've met. There was another one that I got that said that used the word transparent, very transparent, good communicator, transparent communicator. Those are things I've pretty consistently heard here about Glasscock. And when you look at his resume, you're talking about a guy here, in his, who's a guy, about 40 years old, who, when he started his coaching career from 2002 to 2007 at Joliet Junior College, then went to Arizona Western in 2008 before jumping into, and that's when he was, on field as an assistant coach, then jumped into like player personnel roles and recruiting when he was at Northern Illinois from 2009 to 2010. And then you kind of look beyond how that started to go, because after that, he goes to Minnesota as the director of recruiting from 2011 to 2016. And then in 2017, he ends up at NC State, where he's there through the COVID year as the director of player personnel before being hired at the University of Texas, where he was the director of player personnel under Sark from 21 to 23 for those 3 seasons before Lane hired him to be his general manager, replacing Austin Thomas. So when you look at what they've been able to do in 2 years, it's interesting because the consensus feeling around the Ole Miss program is that while they don't necessarily have the resources to have top-tier recruiting classes, for example, the 2 high school signing classes that Billy Glasscock has helped Lane Kiffin sign at Ole Miss, last year they were 19th, and in 2024 they were 20th. So you're not talking about like these consensus top 10 classes. You're talking about classes that are down in the rankings in the Southeastern Conference. But what they've obviously done exceptionally well is evaluate the right talent out of the high school ranks and then hit in the portal, because they had the number 1 portal class in 2024 and the number 2 portal class in 2025. So you're talking about their, and by the way, this most recent draft after Glasscock's first year as the GM, they set an Ole Miss program record with 8 players drafted. So what I think you've seen is they evaluate talent, know what they're looking for. I mean, Trinidad Chambliss is a great example of that. And that's really Charlie Weiss and Lane Kiffin, who found him on Twitter, evaluated, got him in. But you could look a year ago at a guy like Trey Harris, who wasn't a big-time receiver. He was a Louisiana Tech player who ends up at Ole Miss, and but for the injuries, likely would have won the Biletnikoff. So you can look at how they've built the roster through their evaluation. And when you're able to match the evaluation that Kiffin and Glasscock have done with the resources LSU has, that's why Lane Kiffin made this comment during his introductory press conference when he was asked about signing day and their plan for building a roster.
We have big picture thinking too. So we're not reaching or we're not. We have big picture thinking too. So we're not reaching or we're not signing kids because they're from this school or that school or any of that stuff. Okay? We're going to sign the best players that we can on Wednesday, then go to the portal, which I have zero concern about the interest of players with that. Because I know what the interest was of players nationally to come play for us where we were just at. And now when you put that with this stadium and with that logo, I mean,
We got time for 2 more rap and then Ross.
makes me want to go get on the phone right now, but the portal's not open.
You can tell with the strategy. We played that clip a bunch, and I have a feeling we're going to play it a bunch more because he's telling you their strategy. They're going to sign as many good high school players as they can, but they're not going to reach. They're not going to take guys just because they're from a school, but really they are looking to go ham in the transfer portal. And I've shared it with you as well if you're an everydayer, you heard me say it. The phrase treasure chest was used by somebody intimately familiar with the the processes there at LSU with what they're going to be able to do in the transfer portal this year. So January is going to be very fascinating. We'll continue to follow it, how Lane Kiffin and his new general manager, Billy Glasscock, LSU's new general manager, Billy Glasscock, do. One other quick important note, as we've kept you up to date with all of the different staff changes and additions that we followed. I was also able to report over at LouisianaSports.net here on Thursday morning that Tyler Vines is joining LSU as well in an administrative role. So Vines was the assistant director of football operations at Ole Miss. He's leaving that role at Ole Miss to assume what we would take on what we would assume is a similar role in Baton Rouge on Lane Kiffin's staff. So Vines graduated from Florida in 2016. He joins, obviously, Billy Glasscock as the general manager, and Dwique Wilson, who have already come as well as support staff roles to join LSU and Lane Kiffin in Baton Rouge. So as we learn more about the staff and Lane Kiffin's new staff at LSU, we'll continue to share it with you. And when we have opportunities to hear from and learn more about LSU's new general manager, Billy Glasscock, we'll certainly talk about that right here as well. But in the meantime, it appears though Austin Thomas's third stint at LSU has come to an end. Okay, so has this episode of Locked on LSU come to an end? So please smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell so you're notified whenever we post a new video, and let a friend know that if they love the Tigers, we got you here every single day for Locked on LSU, your team every day.